Coming up, Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong says North Korea will soon test an ICBM at its normal trajectory instead of the current lofted angle. This comes as South Korea conducts a joint aerial exercise with the U.S. using B-52 bombers and F-22 stealth fighters. Heavy snowfall hits South Korea as people are rushing to work. The capital region has been seeing up to 3 centimeters per hour since the early hours. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters is on its toes. Plus, the parliamentary probe into the Itaewon tragedy is now headed on site as bipartisan members of the committee will be visiting the alley in Itaewon as well as Itaewon Police Station to look into the reasons behind the tragedy. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. Our top story this morning, North Korea claims its ICBM will soon be ready to be test launched at a normal trajectory instead of a lofted angle, as was the case recently. The sister of the regime's leader confirmed this in a statement carried by the KCNA. Kim Yo-jong also hit out at what she called dummy experts who disparaged the North's weapons. In November, Pyongyang announced it developed a new type of ICBM dubbed the Hwasong-17, which could even reach continental U.S. South Korea and the U.S. held a combined aerial exercise involving a B-52 bomber and F-22 stealth fighters. This is the first time in more than 4 years that the U.S. has sent the Raptors to the nation. Our Paeunji has the details.
The U.S. has sent a B-52 bomber and F-22 stealth fighters to South Korea. They took part in a combined aerial exercise with South Korea on Tuesday at Korea's Air Defense Identification Zone near Jeju Island. B-52 bombers are capable of flying at high subsonic speeds and can carry nuclear or precision-guided conventional weapons. And this is the first time since May 2018 that the F-22 fifth-generation stealth fighters that are currently based in Okinawa, Japan, have come to South Korea to stage combined exercises. As for South Korea's Air Force, Seoul's defense ministry said F-35 stealth jets and F-15K fighters have joined the drill. The F-22s will be deployed in South Korea throughout this week to hold separate drills aimed at countering North Korea's nuclear and missile threats with Korea's F-35A. Seoul's defense ministry explained that the joint drill was to increase the sharing of information between the two allies and strengthen their capabilities when conducting combined military operations. It added that the deployment of B-52 and F-22 fighters is part of efforts to strengthen extended deterrence, as agreed upon last month during talks between the allies' top military officials in Washington. It also said South Korea and the U.S. will continue to strengthen their combined defense readiness against North Korea's threats. Paeunji, Arirang News.
The United States shared a new draft of the United Nations Security Council presidential statement with member nations on Wednesday, Geneva time. The new draft condemns North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile test fire last month. According to UN sources, the draft includes strongly worded warnings about the ICBM test launch last month, stating it's a breach of UN mandates. It calls on North Korea to cease all missile tests and return to the table for talks. The U.S. is drafting the presidential statement on behalf of the UN Council because China and Russia have recently been vetoing sanctions and resolutions on North Korea. South Korea's overall inflation for 2022 is expected to hit levels not seen since the Asian financial crisis. The BOK expects it to slow down next year, but an important factor is the global energy prices. Our Choi Min-jung shares with us the central banker's remarks.
South Korea this year is expected to see its worst inflation since 1998. The Bank of Korea on Tuesday said this year's overall inflation rate is expected to hit the highest level since the Asian financial crisis, when prices rose by more than 7%. This comes as prices jumped 5.1% on year during the January to November period. That's well above the inflation rate of 4.7% witnessed during the global financial crisis in 2008. However, prices have begun to rise at a slower pace since hitting the peak in July, mainly thanks to prices for oil and agricultural products stabilizing. The BOK forecasts inflation to remain at around 5% for the time being, but expects the pace to eventually slow due to increasing downward pressure in the global economy. The central bank also highlighted the uptick in the country's core inflation, which doesn't include volatile food and energy prices. Core inflation jumped above 4% in the second half of this year, mainly due to soaring prices for dining out, fueled by eased social distancing rules and rising costs for raw materials. Other factors that will likely contribute to rising prices are unstable energy prices, with OPEC Plus cutting oil production next year and countries imposing tougher sanctions against Russia. Against this backdrop, the central bank said it will thoroughly monitor the situation and draw up effective measures.
As there is great uncertainty, we will examine how past policies affected the country's economic slowdown and take action after taking into account interest rate changes in major countries like the US.
Meanwhile, the BOK says it still needs measures to tighten its monetary policies, as the inflation rate is still well above the country's target of 2%, even if inflation begins to fall from next year. However, it did stress that this does not necessarily mean that the interest rate will be hitting their peak of 3.5%, as was widely expected last month. Choi Min-dong, Arirang News.
The UN administration seeks to extend a system allowing small businesses to have employees work overtime. There's a limit put in place by the previous administration. Only the smallest businesses can exceed that. The government wants lawmakers to pass a bill to extend it. Our Shin Ha-young explains further.
In South Korea, companies are only allowed to have their employees work 52 hours per week, including 40 regular hours and 12 overtime hours. To prevent labor shortages, small firms with 29 or fewer employees can add an extra 8 hours. But the overtime system is set to expire at the end of this month. It's a concern for small business, so the Yoon Suk-yeol administration wants lawmakers to extend the system for 2 years. The main opposition Democratic Party, however, opposes this, saying it defeats the purpose of 52-hour limit, which is aimed at improving workers' quality of life. On Tuesday, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho emphasized the difficulties small businesses would face if the system were not extended.
The government is pushing to reform the labor market by ensuring flexible work hours, but it takes time to legislate and implement a law. So extending the current overtime system is something that must be done to ease the burden on small and medium-sized businesses.
By sector, he said, allowing the system to expire will most badly affect shipbuilding, information technology, and factories that run 24 hours a day. He also said if they're limited to 52 hours, more workers will have to take on extra jobs to make ends meet.
It is a matter of people's livelihood, so I sincerely urge the ruling and opposition parties to work together to pass a bill before the end of this year.
The government announced its plan to push for such a bill in late October, but the matter has not yet even been discussed by lawmakers in committee. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Now, it's been snowing heavily this morning in South Korea's capital area and central regions, and the government has issued a level 1 emergency response to prevent accidents during commuting hours. The Korea Meteorological Agency issued a heavy snowfall advisory a little before 5 a.m. Some regions in the greater Seoul area, including Incheon and the north of Gyeonggi-do province, saw up to 2 to 3 centimeters of snow per hour, while some areas in Seoul saw a centimeter of snowfall per hour. City officials and Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters are paying close attention to snow removal to keep people safe while commuting to work. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo ordered authorities to do everything they could to prevent accidents. The National Assembly's Special Bipartisan Committee for the probe into the Itaewon tragedy will begin its first on-site investigations on Wednesday. The members will begin by paying their respects at a makeshift altar at Noksapyeong Station, then head over to the site of the tragedy. They will also head over to Itaewon Police Station, Seoul Police Agency, and Seoul City Hall. This comes a day after the ruling People Power Party members rejoined the committee after quitting due to the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea pushing through a referral to oust the current Interior and Safety Minister Lee Sang-min. To achieve its goal of becoming a global digital leader, South Korea is investing heavily into tech startups. In the third episode of our Digital Korea series, Shin Ye-eun visits some innovative small companies to see how they are shaping the country's digital vision.
Soon, this is how we'll get our goods delivered to us here in Korea, through autonomous drones. This drone is South Korea's first ever convenience store delivery drone. It can hold up to 5 kilograms of goods and fly up to 25 minutes.
There's even more autopilot drones getting ready for takeoff. As you can see, they're all different in size and they all have very distinctive traits. For instance, this one can fly up to 140 kilometers, the longest flight distance for any drone here at Pablo Air.
Pablo Air jumped into the unmanned aerial vehicle market in 2018. Though it's a startup, it's one of the first companies in Korea to enter this growing market. That's why it's asking for government support.
Companies like us play an important role in making Korea into the strongest digital leader in the world. That's because we're on the forefront of developing new technologies and showing them off globally. We would like for the government to give us the appropriate support, whether that be providing information on any regulations or laws we need to keep in mind, or by giving out subsidies.
That's exactly what the government is trying to do.
To create a new digital order, we need to have high-quality tech in areas like AI, data, software, and cloud services. We hope companies can bring these things to the table. We're trying to expand ways for startups and small and medium-sized enterprises to collaborate with larger companies. We're also trying to help more companies go global.
Like Sendbird, a chat conversation platform company that launched in Korea but soon moved its headquarters to the United States.
So for those companies who are thinking about going global, just like Sendbird, I think they need to take a risk, but also understand how strong we are in terms of our talent standpoint.
The government aims to focus on developing more tech talent and human resources, mainly by expanding the number of classes or schools specializing in software and AI education. By 2026, officials hope to nurture 1 million prodigies in the digital sector. Shin Ye-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea is yet to get past COVID-19. As much as society wants to move on from it, the cases have been jumping up. Just yesterday, 87,559 new infections were confirmed in the country. So where do we go from here? Let's turn to our Professor Howard Lee from Seoul National University's Department of Molecular Medicine and Biopharmaceutical Sciences. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning to you, sir.
While I love talking to you in the morning, I hate the fact that it's still on COVID. Now we're seeing the highest daily new infections in 100 days. Where are we compared to other waves of infections that occurred in the past?
Yes, the number of daily new cases, as you mentioned, has approached almost 90,000 yesterday. And this number is likely to increase for a couple more weeks. However, the slope of the increasing part of the uphill curve is not as steep as it used to be in the two previous resurgent waves, namely those in early March and mid-August, respectively, this year, both caused by the Omicron variants. This means that the peak could be much smaller than the ones we saw earlier this year. So, although the number of infections is rising, we don't need to worry too much about that, particularly as long as we are fully vaccinated and booster shots were regularly followed. Not only that, we have several anti-COVID-19 treatments, such as antiviral agents, and bivalent vaccines are also available.
Right, now you are hopeful at the moment that the peak won't be as big, but there's a big twist to this situation. The government hinted at removing the indoor mask mandate sooner than expected. Now, will cases actually jump from this point if the mask mandate were to be lifted? I know I've asked you before, but considering this current situation right now, is it timely to have the mandates lifted?
Well, I don't think it will rise unpreparedly, Although we may see some increase or jitters, I should say, especially for a couple of weeks after the mandate is lifted. As I mentioned before, I'm not in favor of indiscriminate indoor face mask mandate. We have to take into account the real-world effectiveness of indoor mask wearing, which depends heavily on the type of masks and how we use them. In addition, there are other factors that may affect the utility of masks, most of which we cannot control over. For example, the crowdedness of the room, air circulation and ventilation, all of them could influence the final effectiveness of indoor mask wearing. There are other points that we have to consider as well. Pandemic fatigue is one of them, as I emphasized repeatedly before. And worse, the pandemic seems behind us. High vaccination rate and the wide availability of anti-COVID-19 treatments, as I said also, are another point that makes the situation quite different than what we used to be a year ago. So I propose to lift unanimous indoor face mask wearing mandate at this point.
Well, we've already talked about this numerous times, so I know where you stand. Right. But now turning to the possible twin-demic, South Korea is seeing a couple of seasonal flus in the country, cases. What's more dangerous? I know we don't have a choice, but what would be more dangerous to flu or COVID-19?
We don't have any choice. Oh, but before I answer your question, let me just correct one small thing. We are actually now in a twin-demic. The cutoff has been passed already. Getting back to your original question, both flu and COVID-19 are dangerous, particularly for those who are vulnerable to either of them. The case fatality is also similar, particularly in South Korea, with both being approximately 0.1%. A patient can get caught by both infections at the same time or with some time apart. This is why we call it, quote unquote, twin-demic. So this is not something that one is safer or worse than the other. Both are bad and dangerous. If you are not fully vaccinated for either, get vaccinated as soon as possible. It may not protect you from being infected 100%, but the symptoms will be much milder if vaccinated. Also, we have a couple of antiviral agents for both of them. So both of them are dangerous, but we are sort of ready at this point.
Right. I wanted to ask you this question because not many are willing to get vaccinated by both at the moment, looking at the numbers. So maybe if you give one more priority, it'll be easier to push people to be vaccinated. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, despite the topic.
Thank you. Drive safely.
Thank you. Stay safe too.
Thank you.
For a look at news from around the world, we turn to our Lee Seung-jae standing by at the Arirang News Center. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Let's start with the Taliban announcing the closure of universities for women in Afghanistan. What's the latest there?
That's right, Doyan. The Taliban government has suspended university education for all female students in Afghanistan in the latest move to clamp down on the rights and freedoms of Afghan women. Now, according to a spokesman, on Tuesday, the Afghan Ministry of Higher Education decided in a cabinet meeting that the order would go into effect immediately. The latest move comes after girls were barred from returning to secondary schools in March. The ban also comes less than 3 months after thousands of girls and women took university entrance exams across the country. The Taliban's announcement was met with an international chorus of condemnation, with the U.S. warning the Taliban would be held accountable. Now, staying in Afghanistan, 2 Americans detained earlier this year by the Taliban were released on Tuesday. According to U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price, the release of the 2 Americans appears to be a goodwill gesture by the Taliban. However, Price stressed that the release was not a prisoner or detainee swap and no money exchanged hands. One of the Americans is filmmaker Ivor Shearer, who was arrested in August this year while filming in Kabul, while the name of the second American is being withheld at the family's request. Now over to the United States. Now, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck northern California's Humboldt County around 2:30 a.m. Tuesday, leaving at least 2 dead and injuring 11 others. The quake has also caused damage to roads and homes, leaving tens of thousands without electricity. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, more than 3 dozen smaller quakes as powerful as magnitude 4.6 struck the area afterward. The latest earthquake comes exactly a year since a 6.2 magnitude quake struck just off of Humboldt County's Cape Mendoncino. And finally, millions of Argentines have flooded onto the streets of Buenos Aires on Tuesday to celebrate the country's World Cup victory. According to reports from local media, 4 million people crowded downtown Buenos Aires. With so many fans in the area, the players who had been on an open-top bus were forced to take a helicopter to continue these celebrations. Fans were seen holding banners of Lionel Messi and late icon Diego Maradona, playing instruments and climbing lampposts to get a better look at the players. The government even declared Tuesday a national holiday to allow fans to celebrate the win.
Good morning. Just when we thought we'd get a slight relief from the ongoing severe cold snap, a blizzard sweeps across Korea with a heavy snow advisory issued in central parts of the country. And snow is falling 3 centimeters an hour. As a result, conditions are making travel extremely difficult this morning. For a closer look, northern parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do could see the heavy snowfall of up to 15 centimeters, while Seoul and the rest of the country will see 1 to 8 centimeters of snowfall. So please drive and walk with special care during the first half of the day. Afternoon highs will hover near seasonal norms this afternoon. Seoul topping out at 4 degrees, Daegu, Daejeon at 5 degrees Celsius. This round of snow should let up by the mid-afternoon. Then we'll welcome the winter solstice with teeth-chattering temperatures. Friday will be even colder, and there appears to be no break from the upcoming cold spell. Making matters worse, Jeollado and Jeju are forecast to receive massive snowfall once again. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Thursday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News, though, for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.